I am delighted to introduce Stefan Sanchez and Jos van Rosen as our speakers today, or should I say interviewees. Stefan is a director at Value People with a diverse and varied career in the public sector and significant experience in business case development. Jos is a strategy and business case consultant at Van Rosen Consulting with over 15 years experience of working with businesses to help them make the best decisions. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Let's get straight into the questions then. A nice easy question to start with, and I'll direct this one at Jos first, if that's okay. So Jos, why are business cases important?
Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I think business cases are important really for a number of reasons, because they play a number of different roles. First of all, it's a framework for justifying that a problem needs solving in the first place. That's something that's often overlooked. And if we agree that the problem needs solving, a business case also outlines potential solutions, and it evaluates which solution is the best fit. But in addition, a business case is also a platform that can really help a team to align stakeholders that have an interest in a project. And last but not least, when it comes to implementation, the business case also becomes a baseline for implementers, and once a project has been implemented, for those that need to extract the value from projects. So there's a lot of roles, always a lot of value there. Moreover, it's also very important because the average project significantly overspends and underdelivers on the business case. What you see in the chart here is the projected costs and the projected benefits. They are set at 100%. And one study from McKinsey back in October 2012 showed, this is specific to initiatives in the IT area, but its implications apply wider as well, that the average project overspends by approximately 50%, 45%, and it underdelivers by about 55%. And those numbers are quite big. And when you think about it, what that really means is the actual return on investment is only 30% of the projected return on investment at the moment that the business case gets approved. So think about that next time when you review a business case. You have to really ask yourself, if I got only roughly 1/3 or even less of what the business case tells me I'm going to get, am I still going to be happy with that? That's how serious it is. And the shortfall between the 30 and the 100% is really driven by a combination of optimism and execution with excellence. They both play a critical role in the business case. What I really find exciting is that there are a lot of things we can do in the business case that are proven to help us deliver better value for money from a project. So I think at this time I'd be happy to head over to Stefan and to see how he looks at the importance of the business case.
Thank you for that, Jos. Thanks, Anna. Well, I mean, there are a number of reasons why I think business cases are important. I mean, the key overarching reason is that everybody wants to optimize value for money. Everybody wants to get the biggest bang per buck, whether that's in the public or the private sector. Now, on the slide there, there are a number of points that really sort of highlight, certainly from the public sector perspective, why business cases are important. We're spending money. We're spending public money in the public sector, so we're accountable for that money. So it's very important to be able to document how that money is spent. Obviously, that also translates across into the private sector, where shareholders obviously hold companies to account. There's often an internal and possibly an external approvals process. You need an artifact to take through that process. You need a document that you can demonstrate that you've done the analysis on and looked at a range of options, and something that somebody can read and say yes or no to. Business cases should be using best practice. There is the better business case methodology, which I'll expand on as we go through the webinar, which is the equivalent, if you like, for business cases of PRINCE2 for projects or MSP for programs. Another key point for me is that a business case acts as a repository for information and provides you with an evidence base. Very often we see business cases developed as if they are the first of their kind. You know, we might write a business case for a school or a hospital and start from scratch. Well, it's not the first time we've built a school or a hospital, so let's go back and look at the business cases for previous schools and hospitals and see if we actually delivered what we expected to deliver. Did we deliver the benefits, for example, that we expected when we set out those investments? So it's important as an artifact that you can go back to and use as a sort of reference class, if you like, to assess whether or not the benefits were delivered, whether the risks materialized, and whether you actually achieved the outcomes that you expected. But for me, actually, the overarching point, and the reason I come to it last, is that one at the top. Business cases should not be written retrospectively. They should be written as you go through the process. You should use the business case process as a thinking process, and as it says there, a framework for scoping and planning the spending proposals to lead to efficient and effective spend. So don't just come up with an idea. Don't think, okay, we've got to write a business case to justify a decision that's already been made. Start the process early on. Use the business case process and the tools within it as a tool to help you develop the proposal. And I think that is the way really that we ultimately can optimize value for money.
What do you think value for money means in the public sector?
Okay, so if we can move to the next slide. Thank you, Joss. So let me just explain a little bit about benefits. Whenever we invest in anything, we expect to realize benefits. And there are different broad categories of benefits. There are benefits that we can value in cash terms. So those are cash releasing benefits. There are some benefits that we can value in cash terms, but we don't necessarily receive the money in our bank accounts. So things like people's time that you can put a value on, but you don't receive the saving back. And then there are what we describe as qualitative benefits, which we can't count in monetary terms, but we can and should make some assessment of in terms of how we value them. So in the public sector, obviously the public sector is interested in saving money, being more efficient and effective, but a lot of the reasons for investment in the public sector are for societal reasons. So we often invest, I mean, let's stick with health and education. We often invest to deliver improved health or improved education. Now, the benefits of those investments, I think, are broadly in that sort of qualitative camp. Some of them will be quantifiable in monetary terms, but most of them will be societal benefits. And even if you can quantify them, it's usually quite difficult, or very difficult, in fact, to start to put figures on these things. So in the public sector context, it's, this issue of benefits and the reason for investing is key, and it becomes quite a sort of center point of the business case, and quite a complex thing to try and set out and set out in a reasonable fashion. So I mean that's my view of benefits in the public sector, and certainly I think benefits are at the centre of value for money. So we have to realise benefits if we're going to deliver value.
Can you just explain whether this concept of value for money translates to the private sector?
I think what you'll find in the private sector is that generally there's probably a greater focus on what we would call cashable benefits. So it's really focused on savings you can make or incremental income. After all, it is all about return on investment. But at the same time, most businesses that I work with also really spend about half of their capital budget on replacement investments. And those are typically investments where a business often really struggles to financially justify spending that money right now, basically just to keep what they have already. What I find interesting is that those investments are often the most attractive ones to make, but it's making sure that you can articulate that clearly as well, so that you can prioritize it against other opportunities that on the face of it appear more exciting. On top of that, when we speaking of value for money, over the years I feel I do see an increasing awareness of societal benefits with private organizations as well, especially at local level, where I think I see local businesses reach out more to the communities that they are part of. But it's probably a smaller thing than what you'd see in the private sector. Now, you may wonder what this elephant is doing here. Part of managing value for money is also working out what to spend your money on and what are the problems that you want to address. And in order to do that, you first need to understand the problem. Stefan already said just now, you shouldn't really start a business case once you've already made up your mind what you're going to do. You first need to work out what's the problem and use the business case process for that as well. In this picture, these blind men, they work as a team together to identify what an elephant looks like. They don't know what it looks like, but they can only touch one part of the elephant. And when they compare notes, they're probably more confused than when they made their individual observations, because everybody has a very, 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 very different view. And that's exactly what I often see in a business case as well. The problem is identified very, very narrowly, often in a small silo, and the problem is then solved out of its actual context, and therefore does not necessarily add any value to the portfolio of the organization's activities. And that's really one of the major reasons why projects under-deliver as a result.
What principles apply to the development of business cases in the private sector?
We talked about this gap earlier, and really there's a big discrepancy between best practice and reality. I've made it my mission to reduce this results gap that we see here. And what I find exciting is that there's a lot that we can do in the business case to proactively impact project success. And I've condensed research, insights, and experience into a book. It's a book that helps you craft a business case with vastly increased odds of delivering targeted results. Just, if you'll allow me, I'll include a snapshot here. But the key point really is that a business case is not a sales brochure for a solution. It's an objective assessment of the situations and potential alternative solutions. Let me show you here how important that is. Alternatives really have a lot of value. There's some research that has been done both in the public and in the private sector that's concluded that for 70% of strategic decisions, there's only one alternative. Effectively, you're saying, should we do this or not? And that's the typical type of business case that's typically being crafted after a decision has already been made. So people effectively don't spend any time looking at all the alternatives. But here's the really exciting bit. The project performs 6 times better, or has 6 times higher odds to meet expectations to actually achieve the 100% of the benefits that it targeted at the outset, when just 2 genuine alternatives are being looked at. And there's a lot of exciting reasons for that that we probably need to talk about in a session in the future. But I think that's just such an exciting insight that just spending a little bit of time on genuinely looking at alternative ways that you can solve a problem, that can really make a big difference to achieving the project value as well.
Familiar with the 5-case model? Please can you tell us a bit more about the significance of this?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, thanks, Joss. I completely agree with everything you said there. And the approach to business cases in the public sector in the UK is governed by this methodology or framework called the 5-case model, or better business cases, which is the sort of trade name for it. So what does that do? Well, what it does really is it gives you a standardized approach to developing business cases, and it's an iterative approach as well. So you develop it in different iterations and decide whether you want to progress to the next stage before expending too much effort. Let me just explain what the key elements are. So first of all, there are 5 cases, obviously. It's the 5-case model. And basically that boils down to 5 high-level questions. So in terms of strategic fit, is there a compelling case for change? Why are we doing something in the first place? Why are we proposing to invest money and effort into this project or this program? And what is it that we want to achieve? So is there a strategic fit? Is there a strategic case? Secondly, the economic case. Can we demonstrate value? Well, economics is all about choice, and Joss has just talked about the importance of having alternatives. The 5-case model sets out that you should have at least a short list of 4 alternatives. You should look at a long list of options, a wide range of options, and boil that down to a short list. And there's an approach and a methodology and a framework to help you get to that point. But you should be comparing 4 genuine, realistic alternatives within the economic case, doing some quite detailed analysis around those, or proportionate analysis, to work out which one of those options optimizes value. And in the public sector, that's public value and value for money. So once you've decided what you want to do, what the answer is, the commercial case is all about the deal. Can you do a deal with service providers to deliver the service that you've decided you need in the economic case? What does that deal look like? How is the risk shared between the organisation that's investing the money and the service provider, etc.? So what are the commercial arrangements? Fourthly, the financial case is what we're proposing to do affordable. Have we got the money? Where is the money coming from? Is there capital involved? Is there revenue involved? Are there multiple funding streams? Very often these days, projects are funded by a number of different supporters or sponsors, and we rely on those different sponsors to put money into the pot. So we need to understand what the financials look like. And then finally, the 5th case is the management case, and this should be familiar to APM members. This is all about how the project is going to be successfully delivered. What are the milestones along the path to delivering the project successfully? Are you using any defined methodologies like PRINCE2 or MSP? So as a whole, if you can answer those 5 questions proportionately to the investment that you're making, you should have a really solid proposal. And as I said at the start, and as Joss reiterated, it's very important that you start this process early on in the development of the project rather than coming to it once you've decided what you want to do. Otherwise, you stumble into problems when you're looking at the options. I talked about an iterative approach. If you can just forward it on, I think it's a building slide. There we go. So for major schemes, and what I mean by major schemes is in the public sector, that's anything above a total life of £5 million, or if there's a significant amount of risk involved, we develop it in 3 stages. We develop what's called the strategic outline case, which very much focuses on that front end of the business case. It's the strategic fit and the shortlisting of options. And before we do any more detailed work, we ask for formal approval. So you go to the sponsors and say, do you agree with the direction of travel? Here's the shortlist. Does it look sensible? Shall we continue? And if they say yes, if the sponsors agree to that, you then can go on and develop the outline business case, which adds all the economic analysis and any number work around the shortlist of options, sets out the potential deal, and again at that point it's often useful to go back to sponsors and say, this is exactly what we want to achieve. We've got a plan to procure this now. Before we go out to the market, are you content that this is the right option, that this is the correct solution? And if they say yes, again, the full business case is all about the procurement process, because in the public sector there's very stringent rules around how procurement of large projects is undertaken. So, I mean, that is it very much in a nutshell. I mean, the only thing I would say is that if you're spending £500,000, or even less actually, you can still use the methodology, you can still ask those 5 questions. But you would do so proportionately. You're not going to do detailed cost-benefit analysis for a range of options for fitting out an office with furniture, and you're probably not going to use this iterative process. You might do it in 1 stage rather than 3 stages. So my point really is that the methodology does provide you with that standardized approach and enables you to apply it to small investments, large investments, and basically compare the value of investments against each other.
Do you think that this model can also work in the private sector?
I think that's absolutely valid. I took the 5-case course a while back, and what really excites me about it that it hangs together very well. It's a methodology that really provides a logical approach to demonstrating strategic fit, and it also identifies a short list of alternative solutions, and it also helps you to pare down which solutions are likely to be the right ones or the right one to address the problem with. What I particularly like in my work, I always encourage people to think outside the box and to look for ways to solve a problem that are not immediately obvious. For some people that's easier than for others. What the options framework that's part of the 5-case approach actually does is it gives you a framework that allows you to do that. So you don't need to be a blue sky thinker to come up with quite an attractive range of alternative solutions. So that's something that really excites me. The other thing I think worth noting is about procurement. In the private sector, procurement has, I would say, an element of being driven by historical trading relationships. If a trading relationship works well, then people just keep on using it. And the 5-case model, probably because it emanates from the public sector, that puts a lot more onus on justifying why you would want to go with a certain procurement solution. So that I find that coming from the private sector quite an eye-opener, saying that yes, let's think about it. Are there any other ways that we could procure a solution like this? How can we justify to ourselves that what we are planning on doing is the right thing? But I would say almost regardless of the model that you use, and that's the title of the session this afternoon as well, the process is also really important. One of the things that we need to talk about is working with a team, and I think this is where Stefan and I, in our roles as business case experts, also come in. Anyone really can craft a business case with knowledge of where you need to fill in the blanks. But our role is really to help people think about what you should be putting there and do it in such a way that it's also going to work. When it comes to working as a team, you can always tell when a business case is crafted as a desk exercise. There's loads of assumptions, typically poorly substantiated, and there's typically very limited reach. It doesn't show holistic thinking. Business cases that are crafted by a team, they typically hang together well. They're typically not clear because you can tell that a lot of debate has gone into that as well. But it's not just about the project team or the business case team that has to work on it. You need to reach out to stakeholders as well, and ideally already early on in the process, so that you can get their guidance and their inputs included in the business case, and effectively that helps you to save time, because most business cases that I see where people haven't really thought too much about how to craft a business case, those business cases tend to go through quite a number of iterations. And what I'm saying is that the more inputs you can get from future reviewers, from stakeholders, from people who are going to be responsible for results, if you can get those inputs and thoughts already on the table early on in the process, that can really help you save a lot of time, and B, also build a better business case than you otherwise would have built. The other thing where it comes to people is make sure that you have the right people on the team. That sounds such an obvious thing to say, but McKinsey has done some very exciting research back in 2008 where they showed that projects where people who are responsible for project implementation are involved in the crafting of a business case, those projects are twice as likely to achieve their objectives than projects where implementers have not been involved. And it makes a lot of sense, because people who are going to be responsible, they can tell you almost immediately the resources that they need, whether things are going to work or not, or whether the resources that you will be using are already spoken for by other initiatives. So it sort of builds in a reality check before you even get to approval. So that's an important thing, really.
I was going to just reinforce the point that you made about stakeholders, and I know, appreciate it's slightly off script, but it's certainly, we see that in the public sector very much, and I always say to people that you could sort of lock yourself in a dark room and create the perfect business case with perfect options, perfect analysis, but if you don't involve stakeholders in that process, then it's worth nothing. Actually the best business case is probably a compromise that has the agreement of all the right stakeholders involved, because that's more likely to be deliverable and successful than one that you've just academically produced.
I think moving on from this whole people aspect, the other thing that's important when it comes to process is really challenge what I would call the no doubts. I always see, I think this is just a great quote. Without data, you are just another person with an opinion. And what I often find is that there's so many assumptions and so many assertions included in a business case, and before long, in the heads of the people that read the business case, they become fact because it's all they know. And I always encourage my clients to really think through: do you have the right to believe that the numbers or the rationale that you're putting in a business case is correct? And at first, people typically look at me a little bit blank and say, well, I think so. But when you really peel a few layers of the onion and ask yourself, what gives me the right to believe that this assertion or this assumption or this number is correct, and how that helps me in achieve value out of this initiative, that can really change the name of the game. Because very often there are assertions like this is a strategic imperative, or we can't afford not to do it, even though the returns are not that exciting, or everyone's asking for it. Well, those are all kinds of statements where you say, well, really, let's understand that first. Is that really true? And if it is true, why doesn't it come back in attractive returns? So I think that's also a very important point to make. Whenever you see anything that a business case is really based on, understand also, do you have the right to believe?
What are your thoughts on adapting this structured approach? I know you've got quite a lot of experience in the 5-case model to the private sector. What are your views on it?
Thanks, Anna. I wouldn't disagree with anything that Joss has said, really. I think, if anything, the methodology is more straightforward to apply in the private sector than it is in the public sector. As I set out when I was talking about benefits, the public sector is very concerned with the societal benefits. Okay, not losing sight of cash releasing benefits and efficiency savings, but the reason we invest in the public sector is to deliver benefit to society. In a private sector context, it's almost the other way round, where the focus is mainly on efficiency and economy and return on investment, or profit, if you like, possibly with some societal benefits or reputational benefits involved. But that makes it easier, because those are the easier benefits to identify and to quantify within the business case, and also to track and measure as you go on to deliver the investment. So I would say that what is important, if you were applying the methodology to the private sector, is to define within your organization what you mean by value for money, because I think that means potentially different things to different organizations of different scales and different industries. So, I mean, certainly the rest of the cases almost certainly apply. You have to have strategic fit with the sort of wider portfolio and strategic approach. So the strategic case applies. You have to look at choices, or you should look at choices. That's a good thing to do. Alternatives, that absolutely applies. As Joss said, it's always good to have a plan for procurement. And whilst the approach to procurement in the public sector is very structured and rules-based, it certainly isn't a bad thing to sort of think outside the box and have a plan for procurement within private sector organisations, even if there is a tried and tested route. Considering different options to the market is always a good thing. So whilst it's probably a bit less complex in the private sector, I still think that all of the 5 cases apply, and it's a potentially incredibly useful methodology that really gives everybody this common language and ability to compare apples with apples. So you can compare a road investment with a school investment or a hospital investment. or in the private sector context, whatever you choose. It gives you the metrics to be able to do that. And I think that sort of standardization of the approach, in the same way as we've got standardized approaches to deliver projects and programs using Prince2 and MSP, is a very useful thing.
I just wondered what else you think is important in business case development.
Well, I think one of the cheapest really and most effective sources of business case value is to learn from projects that have been done in the past. Stefan, I think, already said this earlier on the call. Most projects are seen as unique, whereas in reality many elements aren't. And I think Jack Welch puts that very well here. An organization's ability to learn and to translate that learning into action rapidly is the ultimate competitive advantage. That's really what helps you get ahead of the game. What I often see is that as a result of not looking for lessons, businesses pay the price through project overspending and under-delivery. And if you've already done that in the past, then basically you've paid your tuition there. Now the question then is, why pay tuition and not go to school? We don't need to do a formal project audit to search out any key lessons. What you should really do is, and that's really the trick, is make a review swift, make it painless, and make it valuable. In that sense, a half-hour informal review with a key stakeholder or a project manager from a project that's happened in the past, that short informal review can already save a lot of headache. I think another thing that's really important is this. My credibility goal for client business cases is this. The business case team has to be prepared to bet their pension fund on a project. I know that's quite a brass statement to make, but in order to do that, you must think beyond approval. That's the key thing. Often that's done with a project management plan, and that works fine for project implementation. However, often very little to no time is spent thinking through how value is going to be extracted, like we are in mining almost, how value is going to be extracted after implementation, when, and by whom. And a value delivery plan really does that for you. And this is the key factor in getting the deliverables right in the business case as well. All good and well, but despite a good plan, reality often takes a different turn, as you can see in the picture here. There's dunks in the road, mountains to cross, rainy days ahead. All those risks need to be dealt with as well, and that's why it's important to include an assessment of relevant risks and also to budget for the cost already in the business case if needed. That's also something that's often not happening, and again a good explanation for overspends. As an example, if you think there's a risk you'll get wet, you want to allow for the cost of the umbrella in the business case so that you have to have it to hand when you need it.
Yeah, I won't be risking my pension fund on any business case investments, I guess is the first thing I'd say. Although I think it's a really sort of a good thing to sharpen the mind, thinking about spending your own money. I think the key thing for me, and Joss alluded to this earlier, is that for business cases to really work within an organisation, they need to be policed properly, and I appreciate that sort of sounds bureaucratic, and in some ways it is, and it's meant to be. You know, there are an awful lot of assumptions made in business cases, assumptions around costs, assumptions around benefits, assumptions around risks. Those assumptions need to be tested, and they need to be basically considered to be reasonable. You know, people make wild assumptions around the benefits that they're going to achieve. That chart that Josh showed earlier with return on investment versus actual output. And we always say to people when we're training, you know, double the cost, halve the benefit, which is more or less the same thing. Are you still going? Is it still worth doing? If it still makes sense, it's probably a reasonable business case. But you need somebody there to police the system. You need effective scrutiny and review to look at the assumptions that are made and challenge them, because you can present a business case and you know, following the guidance, following the format, but if your assumptions are very wild, then you know you're not going to deliver what you're supposed to deliver. So that's the first point. I think, secondly, it's important that people are trained and competent in the development of business cases. And I think this issue about having a common language and a common approach to developing and reviewing business cases is important. And lastly, I would just, this is just a note from personal experience really, that many organizations, I think, see the business case production role as an add-on to the job of the project manager. I think that can work for small schemes when you can multitask and there are not, you know, lots of communications going on and lots of complex things to manage, but certainly for large schemes that's a mistake. They're very different jobs. The project manager should be involved in managing the delivery of the business case and the project itself, managing the milestones, managing the communications with the project board and various other stakeholders, and all sorts of complex issues like that. To ask them to also develop a business case and think about the detailed analysis required within the business case alongside that is, you know, basically a plan to fail. So I would just say that if you're involved in developing a significant, large-scale, risky business case, think about having somebody focused on just delivering the business case, working hand in hand with the project manager and the project team, but whose primary purpose is to deliver the business case.
Can the business cases be effectively scaled? So someone's been asked to write a business case for personal development about undergoing some training, and how can they show benefits, value for money, as there are obvious benefits that are hard to be quantified in terms of hard cash. So Stefan, I know you talk about scalability. What would your advice be on that question?
My advice on that would be don't quantify the benefits, identify what the benefits are, and you know, maybe compare them against the status quo, i.e., you know, the current situation doing nothing. I would not be looking to write a business case that was longer than a side of A4 or maybe 2 sides maximum for that sort of justification. I mean, by all means, think about the structure, think about justifying strategically why you might want to invest in training, think about the options that you've got, think about where you can buy the services from, think about where the money's coming from to pay for it, and think about, you know, how you're going to book it and when you're going to go and the plan for delivering it. But don't go into you know, huge detail because it's just disproportionate. You know, 2 sides of A4 maximum.
I'd welcome views on how best to maximise lessons learned across an organisation. Our organisation plays a lot of attention to conducting lessons learned, but I feel we struggle to disseminate that learning widely and effectively.
I think one of the challenges a lot of organizations face is they do the reviews, they identify learnings, but then they don't really know where to store them. So they often end up in a drawer, and that's of course an issue, because if they end up in a drawer, no one often knows that they're there, and even if they know they're there, they don't even know where to find them. So what I often suggest to clients is think about setting up kind of an internal repository, ideally in electronic format, and I would always like to think about something like a Wikipedia style thing. So it's something where the lessons are generic enough that you can share them widely, because sharing widely is important, but it's also something that can be controlled within the organization. The more detail you often go into, often all the detail that typically makes for a juicy story, that's not necessarily needed in order to distill the lessons that are important. So I would really focus on something that's accessible, but you'll need to do a little bit of work in terms of redacting lessons. So think about the format of output so that you can say these are the key lessons we found, and to capture those findings specifically in the repository, and probably more detailed, if you will, audit report you'd need to store somewhere that can be accessed only if that's really needed, and only for certain people, I would say.
Okay,
Anna, can I respond to that as well? I would just add to that, not to forget that you know, there are lots of similar projects out there in the ether around the world that have probably experienced the same issues and are very related to what you're proposing to do. We hear the phrase reference class forecasting used a lot, and that is simply comparing your project against similar projects, on a similar sort of scale. So, when learning the lessons, don't just look within your organisation, look without as well. Look outside and cast the net pretty wide, because somebody somewhere will have done something similar.
And I think if I can still again build on that, I think a great resource for learning lessons is the website of the National Audit Office in the UK that regularly puts findings of the major initiatives that take place in the UK public sector online, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned as well. So even if you work in the private sector, it's a very valuable resource as well.
I assume you guys see quite a lot of business cases. Are there any kind of common pitfalls that you come across and that you could share with us now so that we can avoid these mistakes as we're working on our business cases?
I think the biggest problem is this sort of issue of a business case being a fait accompli. We've said it 3 or 4 times during this session today that very often people have an idea and they write a business case to justify the idea. That doesn't demonstrate value. It doesn't demonstrate value for money at all. What you need to be able to do is demonstrate that you've considered a range of options and that the option that you've chosen is better value than reasonable alternatives. So you very often see what you might describe as a gold-plated option versus do nothing. It comes across more as a sales document, the business case, rather than an objective and impartial consideration of viable alternatives. What I always look for, and certainly always provide if I'm involved in developing a business case, is a viable do minimum, something that is a little bit more than doing nothing and perhaps delivers some of the benefits of much more ambitious options. You might want to consider an ambitious option and something in between, something that perhaps offers a compromise between cost and benefits, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that sort of sweet spot between doing very little and doing too much, because very often you can achieve 80% of the benefits by spending 20% of the money.
I think I'd start with an opening quote by Simon Sinek, and he says, "When the why is clear, the how is easy." So it's really all about understanding what the problem is and why your organization needs to address that problem. And one of the issues that I often find is that people define their problem too narrowly. So if you define your problem as "I don't have a red sports car," then the solution is already baked into the problem. Of course, there's only one answer. Let's go get one. But also think a little bit about who you actually explore the problem with, because if you pass your problem to a group of engineers, you're bound to get an engineering solution. If you pass them to an outsourcing expert, you're bound to get an outsourcing solution. So think about it also in that context, that have people from a number of different lenses or a number of different parts of the organization look at questions, certainly when the questions are a bit bigger, and the choices that you make will have a defined impact on the organization. So I think that's one thing. The other thing is also ask yourself, when you look at different alternatives, the alternative people often overlook is what I like to refer to as the optimized base case. And this is really, if you see a good opportunity, what is it that you cannot already achieve out of that opportunity with your existing resources? Maybe there's some slack in the organization, or maybe there are things that you are doing that you can do less of, so that you can free up resources to do to be applied to the new opportunity. Because that really often gives some very exciting insights. And the businesses that I work with, in roughly half of the situations, I see them actually propose this optimized base case. Let's see what we can get out of our existing set of resources first. I see them put that as forward as a first course of action. So I think that's really exciting. And I think the last pitfall I'd like to mention is question your no doubts. Whenever you see a piece of data, a number or an assumption, peel layers of the onion. That's a very key piece of advice.
Does the 5-case business model lend itself to an agile project management approach? I know this is a question that gets asked quite often and very current or do you need to have do you need to agree too much detail too early in the business case model?
I think the agile approach is very difficult to apply to certain projects and very easy to apply to others. If you're developing online tools or IT solutions, agile can work really well. If you're building a hospital, how do you build an agile hospital? You can't. You've got to plan the thing out from the start. So I think you need to be mindful of the type of project that you're developing. And you could apply the 5-case model approach to an agile environment by writing a program business case. Now, I've not talked about program business cases, but it's the same methodology applied at the program level, so a collection of interrelated projects. So you can set out the high-level outcomes that you want to achieve and the high-level options for achieving those outcomes, and you could have a series of agile projects that explore the different options within that program definition that you set out. So, I mean, I can't really sort of talk about that in any detail now because we don't have time, but just to say that I think the two things are not incompatible. You just need to be careful about how you use them and how you use them together.
Are there any differences in the recorded project overspends and under-delivery of benefits between publicly and privately led projects? So is there any difference in that figure?
The short answer is I don't know the answer. I'm not aware of any research that has been done that specifically contrasts public spending and private spending. That's partly due to the fact that spending by private organizations tends to be not as out there as data on public initiatives. What I would like to say there is that one of the findings you can find is that the bigger projects get, the bigger the overspend and under the delivery indicators relatively get as well. So it's not just in absolute numbers, but relatively as well. And I think that's all explained by typically when projects get bigger, they get also more complex. There's more people involved, and more things can go wrong, and less alignment is there. So that's a broad brush finding there. If you're interested in more research there, I can certainly point you to the Said School of Business, part of the Oxford University, and we can include a link in the document that come out of the webinar here, and they've done some great research into projects mostly in the public sector, large infrastructure things like that. So that gives some further insights there.